Snowy! Huh? Chasing cats again? Snowy.
It's crazy that the movie is a decade old, but the animation is a state of art even in 2025. It's easy to forget now, but The Adventures of Tintin was supposed to be the beginning of something big. A Spielberg and Peter Jackson crossover that almost changed cinema. A franchise supposed to be a trilogy. Maybe even the movie that finally proved that motion capture animation could be as exhilarating as live action. Instead, it became an odd relic. A Spielberg film that doesn't really like a Spielberg film, a blockbuster with no follow-up, and an experiment in animation that almost immediately got left behind. What makes Tintin fascinating isn't the fact that it was directed by Steven Spielberg or produced by Peter Jackson. It's that it was a true collaboration between two of the most influential filmmakers of their time. Spielberg, the master of cinematic spectacles, and Jackson, the technical wizard who helped bring The Lord of the Rings to life. Two titans of Hollywood, one project. That alone should have made Tintin a landmark moment in animation history. Instead, the film exists in this strange limbo, a technical marvel with stunning virtuous cinematography, yet not quite a fully animated movie, not quite a live-action film either. It was a half step forward for motion capture, proving that it could work if done correctly, but also raising questions about whether audience really actually wanted it, and was it really ahead of its time. But before we get all that, let's talk about what actually makes The Adventures of Tintin so unique. It is sort of Spielberg's first animated film. Spielberg is known for his kinetic camera work, his ability to stage action with an almost mathematical precision while making it feel completely organic. The Morocco chase scene in Tintin, that is Spielberg at his absolute best, executing a one-shot chase sequence that would be impossible in live action. He uses limitless possibilities of animation to pull off something that, in theory, should make this most Spielberg movie ever made. And yet, does it feel like a Spielberg film? That's where the collaboration with Peter Jackson comes in. Jackson's Weta Digital handled the animation, and while the film clearly borrows Spielberg's storytelling instincts,
you can't create a story that you haven't yourself lived in some way. Otherwise, you are just a craftsman.
it also leans heavily into the hyper-detailed realism that Jackson has perfected with The Lord of the Rings and King Kong. What you get is this fascinating mix of Spielberg's directorial language and Jackson's technical expertise, but it also creates a weird identity crisis. This is Spielberg's first animated movie, but it never quite embraces animation the way, say, Pixar does. Instead, it feels like Spielberg's directing a live-action film through an animated lens. Which brings to a bigger question. Why was this even an animated movie, and why Tintin is the perfect gateway to animation for adults? For years, Hollywood has had a weird relationship with animation. It's either for kids or it's a niche art form. You can be a Toy Story or you can be into the Spider-Verse, but you can't be both. The Adventures of Tintin sits in this uncomfortable middle ground. It's not a family film in the way Pixar movies are, but it's also not an explicitly adult animated movie like Akira or Love, Death and Robots. Instead, Tintin is one of the rare animated films that fully embraces the blockbuster action movie aesthetics. It does not hold your hand, it does not pander to kids with talking sidekicks or goofy musical numbers. It's pulp adventure, pure and simple. And that's a big part of why it didn't quite find its audience. But here's the thing. Tintin is exactly the kind of movie that proves animation can be just thrilling as live-action movies. Look at the comparisons. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse proved you could make a comic book come to life in ways live-action never could. Arcane showed that animated series can be cinematic, intense, and deeply emotional without being restricted to kids. Claws made 2D animation feels like a modern living painting. But before all those, The Adventure of Tintin was already showing what Hollywood action films could look like if they fully embraced animation. It just came out in a time when audiences weren't quite ready to accept that idea. This is why I can say that Tintin is the lost legacy that never got a sequel. This movie was supposed to be a franchisee. Jackson was supposed to direct the sequel. Spielberg even teased a potential third movie. But here we are, more than a decade later with no follow-up. No official cancellation, just radio silence. So what happened? One theory can be the box office of this movie was solid but not spectacular. Tintin made $373 million worldwide, which isn't bad, but also not the kind of money that demands a sequel. More importantly, it underperformed in the US, which is a huge problem when studios decide whether to greenlight more films. Another reason can be motion capture animation was already on the way out. If you look at the Polar Express, Beowulf, A Christmas Carol, and the other films from that era, you'll notice a trend. Audience never fully embraced the uncanny valley. Even though Tintin avoided that creepy, lifeless face of Polar Express, there was a still lingering sense that motion capture films didn't feel alive in the same way traditional animation did. And finally, there's just simple truth. Priorities changed. Peter Jackson got busy with The Hobbit. Spielberg moved on to the other projects. And as time went on, Tintin became less of a franchise in the making and more of a curiosity. One of the last big motion capture films before Hollywood more or less abandoned the format. But could the sequel of Tintin still happen? Honestly, it's hard to say. Peter Jackson has said that he is still interested, but the longer we wait, the less likely it seems. The technology has evolved. Hollywood has shifted its focus, but honestly, if they were to revisit Tintin, it might make more sense to do it in a completely different style. Look at the success of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Imagine a Tintin movie done in stylized hand-drawn meets 3D that actually mimics the looks of Hergé's original comics. That could be a kind of reinvention that brings Tintin back to the big screen in a way that resonates with modern audiences. Or maybe they will just do what they planned along and finally let Jackson direct the sequel. Either way, the adventures of Tintin remains a fascinating what-if in the history of Hollywood. The perfect blend of Spielberg and Jackson, animation and live action, adventure and technology. A movie that could have changed the future of animation if only it had gotten its due. Hi, I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. Please share this video with at least one of your movie loving friend, and I'll meet you in the next one.